All right, click the links to check out the other video platforms. So you ever feel like we're being manipulated by these puppet masters who I think foment discord is a great phrase, where there was none before, where they create conflict out of nothing just to kind of watch the pawns, watch the puppets fight themselves and be distracted with arguing over petty little things that aren't really a big deal. But there was no conflict before. This story and various examples like it with Scooby-Doo or Star Wars or whatever, the story was written. It was created by the creators, decades ago, and it was complete. It was the alpha and omega of the story. And if you want to tell new stories with new characters, then you write new stories with new characters. Usually people write what they know, and that's kind of the rule of thumb, because it has verisimilitude. But this is a story, and this is not the original story, Sandman. This is a new story, but it has the same name. So you're in this kind of mirror universe where it's the bait and switch, where you're familiar with the original story, you identify with the original story because you saw yourself in it, or for whatever reason, you identify with the original story, you connected to it. In a way, you incorporated it into your own kind of fantasy mythology understanding of that genre. And then 30-odd years later, I think, they're retelling the story, except it's not the same story. It bears no relation to the original story because people aren't fungible. You cannot replace, we're not a soda pop. You can't steal one soda from a refrigerator and replace it with another that's fungible. We're not like that. We're unique and discrete entities. It took 15 billion years to create each individual. We cannot just be swapped, and for some reason that upsets the globalists quite a bit. But this show, Sandman or any other of these various examples, they're told. Their stories are told and completed. There was no conflict in rewatching the old shows or extrapolating from that universe, or even retelling the story, as long as you abide by the artistic original vision of the story. The story has a symphony. It has a theme. It has a tone to it that is not, you just can't swap out instruments and try to expect to tell the same story. It's not the same story. People are different. They're just different. You identify with the characters in the story. There was no conflict, but these Hollywood folks created conflict, and now the puppets are arguing back and forth, calling each other istophobic on social media because you come up with a show like this and go, oh, is this your, honestly, I don't remember the original show too much. Was this or the story, and then I think later a graphic novel. Is this what the original story looked like? No, I'm guessing no. I'm just going to go out on a limb. Guess no. Oh, so, why didn't you write the original story like this? It's a good question. Neil, who's so woke, as he breaks his arm, patting himself on the back, telling people how woke he is. Why didn't you just write the original story like this? Back in, I don't know, the 80s? Oh, probably because it wouldn't sell as well. It would have sold. I mean, people were, there's an audience for if a story well told in the 80s. But would it have been a story well told? A bunch of different people coming together to, tell this story. Would this story have had that willing suspension of disbelief? Would it have felt authentic and organic? Is Neil telling a story that he knows? Is he telling something he's familiar with? No, probably not. He's stepping out too far from the stories he knows how to write. So he wrote something he was familiar with. And that's why the story had verisimilitude. So this isn't the same story, and not only is it not the same story, it is. It seems like it's designed to elicit a response and cause conflict. Like when I say that phrase that these people, they grow the tall grass. Oh, I didn't say. Someone said it. They grow the tall grass so the snakes can hide. They keep the pawns fighting on the chessboard as busy as possible, fighting over cancel culture and woke this and race swap all these characters, and not just they know people aren't outraged about this or about all these Scooby-Doo and whatever other examples. They're not outraged. That's a hell of a straw man. It's mild. It is the mildest of mild interest. They go, oh yeah, they're redoing Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings. It's like, oh okay. You look at it, you're like, that's not Lord of the Rings. Oh, it's better. no, the story has we know the story universe. It's European mythology. It is what it is. Or even something like Scooby Doo, which is entirely entirely fictional. I don't know what it's based on. Maybe what's that English guy with the Sherlock Holmes type of stuff? So, maybe something like that. I mean, everything's based on something. And somebody in the Twitter comments, if you go in the Velma Twitter comment section or YouTube comment section, they go, oh yeah, well the reason they swapped it out is because nobody, nobody. If you created a new story, nobody knows the stories. And I answered like, yes, all characters are new at one point. All characters are new. Everything is new at one point. Why don't you? Yes, you think the guy who wrote Scooby Doo 50 years ago, those were new characters, or Lord of the Rings were new characters at one point. Everyone has to write new characters, and they take this shortcut. They think this bait and switch where they go, "Oh, yeah, we're not gonna write new characters." So Neil was giving this interview, and he's just breaking his arm, patting himself on the back about how woke he was 30 years ago. Except these characters weren't in the story 30 years ago because it wouldn't have sold as well, and it wouldn't have been as good a story because it doesn't make sense. If you watch these episodes on Netflix, I think, this is Netflix. I'm watching it. I paid for Netflix. I didn't just borrow this off the internet. It doesn't. These people all don't. It looks like a LA casting call. It looks like every commercial you see on TV now, where you see it's like these puppet masters are pitting the fair, beautiful people of the light versus the POX folks into conflict, that there was no conflict before. There's no need for the conflict, but they do this in commercials all the time where you see like, oh, hey, these blonde people are sure so silly Billy, aren't they? In these commercials, it's an insurance commercial, and the blonde man's on a tree, and he's cutting the limb of the tree, but he's sitting on the wrong side of the limb. And the pox guy below him has got his convertible car, and the tree destroys the car, some type of stuff. Like, aren't those blonde people so silly? And you're like, I mean, in the back of your mind, you think, yeah, I mean, in my experience, no, blonde people are actually pretty smart. I think, like, logically on the bell curve, they're pretty far to the right. I mean, they seem to have a whole lot of accomplishments behind them. I mean, there's a whole bunch of countries that have their accomplishments behind them, and the triangle of invention. There's a whole lot of blonde dudes who are in that triangle of the UK and Germany, France type of stuff. Sorry if I forgot the other important countries that are within that triangle of creativity and ingenuity and imagination. So it's not it's not really in accord with reality. In the back of your mind, you're seeing this, you're like, why do these commercials always portray these one group of people as just being like drooling idiots who are unable to take care of themselves? They're so slow. And you're like, so these churches and chapels and great, believe it or not, Europe has also got pyramids too, but they're all covered over. You can see them with like ground penetrating radar. I guess everyone pretty much built pyramids, but they have all these majestic things that they've done and created in literature and science and art. I mean, just insane amounts of beauty. And you go, oh, so weird how they're portrayed as idiots. Something's not quite making sense. And it might, like your own personal experience, like, that's not in accord with reality. But you see it on every commercial, or then in every movie where they swap out these stories, Rings of Power or Sandman, or even like this fictional universe, right? But it's like loosely based in European mythology and fantasy. It's very fantasy, but it's like it's coming from somewhere. And he wrote the story, and the reason he didn't put this in the original story because it wouldn't have sold as well. You go, well, why don't you just write an original story now with these, this super diverse type of characters? If you don't want to put European people in this story that's kind of loosely based on European mythology and fantasy, why don't you just write something fresh? And it's like, well, you'd have to start over from the beginning. You have to, yeah, but I mean, there's a ton of people who are writing stories starting over from the beginning. And it's not just that. That's a two-part argument. Is you'd have to start from the beginning. It's like, yes, but if you tell a good story, it will catch on. And these people, like, they have name recognition from the author's name. It would catch on if it was a good story. The second part is, is it organic to have a group of people like this in a story? Would it catch on? Would it be an organic story? Would it connect with people? No, it wouldn't. Probably wouldn't. It would it might with a different author, but not someone like Neil telling the story, because he's super, super woke. The only way it would work would be if it was someone who was not super woke could tell a story like this. And there's only so far you could go, like where you go, oh, so every story, every group of people, you got half the crowd is specifically African and half the crowd is European, and then East Asians are somehow always asked out. They're never really Chinese and Korean and Japanese or Southeast Asians are just seem to be left out of the stories quite a bit. It's usually just African, Middle Eastern, and European in these stories, and it's like no, it doesn't. That doesn't make sense for storytelling. And just because it's not politically correct to say that, it doesn't sell the story. So you get these stories on Netflix where this guy, like the reviewers gave it 87%, of course, but the audience gave it 80%, which is a high score for what I would say is a woke reimagining, cultural Bolshevik type of story. But I also think I haven't looked at the numbers, but I suspect it's a small audience. It's kind of like an echo chamber audience, confirmation bias audience. It's like Woman King. People go to see that story to see a very fictionalized version of. Unfortunately, they fictionalize real world events and they use the same name of the tribe that actually existed, the Homie tribe. And it's like that history's out there. If you look up the history, the first 3 web results will soft pedal that history quite a bit, but you go beyond that and you start looking deeper into it, and they tell you the honest history about like the interviews with people who are writing about meeting these people for the first time, and they were decapitating prisoners and licking the blood off the swords, which is cool. I mean, that tells a good story because it shows like people are like, that's an exciting story. The difference is like you have to lean into it. It's like, oh yeah, we fought like hell, we took heads left and right. It's like, all right, that's telling the story. But that's not a globalist story. That's a nationalist story. And you can't we're caught with this eternal struggle of globalist philosophy versus nationalist philosophy, and you end up with stuff like this, and you're like, this doesn't look real to me. It doesn't look organic. And if I challenge you to have the argument, if you're SJW, to have the argument without ad hominems. Talk about the story and why the story feels either authentic or not authentic, and why it would get people to pay for it. Which is, keep in mind, that's getting people to pay you is the name of the game here. And it's getting people to listen to you is fairly easy. Getting people to pay you is a much greater burden. And SCW seem to forget that. Like, yeah, this is a contractual exchange. You're selling product and you're hoping for money. It's Netflix subscriptions, or maybe even coffee mugs and T-shirts and Halloween whatever people sell associated with shows. You're asking for all that. It's not just like, oh, this is just going to be some ivory tower cultural Marxist philosophy. It's like, no. This is a business. You've got to sell this show. And as it turns out, like, oh, how well do these sell? Not that well. Anyway, no, this is not the show. I don't know what this is, but it will get high reviews and probably not do too well. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. See you guys on the next episode.